Under a burning sky, the Apache riders gathered on the ridge, watching the dust rise far across the plain. They thought the Comanche had fled. No movement, no sound, just the long silence before a storm. Then, from behind the curve of the land, shadows began to move. Fast, low, and wide. The Apache didn't see a charge. They saw dust splitting in two directions, hooves drumming from nowhere, arrows cutting the air like insects. The trap had already closed before the first war cry rose. Horses screamed, men turned their mounts too late, and the horizon vanished in chaos. Spears came from the flank, not the front. Riders fell before they could draw breath. It wasn't bravery that won the plains that day. It was precision, speed, and rhythm. When the smoke cleared, the Apache realized they had faced something different, something built for the open world. The Comanche didn't fight battles. They created storms. And from that day forward, every Apache scout who saw dust rising in the distance learned to pause, to listen, to wonder if the wind itself had turned against them. The plains had chosen a new master, and its silence carried their name. The Comanche didn't rise overnight. Their strength was carved from endless movement. Herds, storms, and survival merging into one rhythm. Generations earlier, they were Shoshone people from the northern mountains, walking hunters bound to cold valleys. Then they found the horse, and everything changed. The animal wasn't just transport, it was transformation. It gave them wings over the plains, speed where others crawled, and vision beyond sight. By the time the Apache noticed their expansion southward, it was already too late. The Comanche didn't conquer by walls or numbers. They conquered by distance, striking deep, vanishing faster than pursuit could follow. Their raids were lessons in motion, hit, scatter, and disappear into the wind. To the Apache, who relied on ambush and close defense, this style was new, unsettling, and unbreakable. Villages burned before warnings reached home, tracks vanished in open grass, and every retreat became an invitation for another strike. The plains themselves seemed to protect these riders, bending to their will, carrying them farther than any tribe had dreamed possible. That was the true beginning of fear, the realization that the enemy no longer approached on foot. He arrived with thunder beneath him. By the mid-18th century, the frontier between Apache and Comanche lands had become a living border of smoke. Skirmishes erupted around rivers, grazing lands, and hunting paths. No treaty could last. No warning came soon enough. The Apache fought with courage, but their weapons met speed instead of formation. The Comanche didn't wait. They provoked. They struck from flanks, circled prey, and vanished before revenge could form. Every raid tested a new method. Every escape refined the art of return. They studied terrain, the wind's direction, the sun's glare, turning nature into an ally. Apache warriors soon learned that even silence meant danger. The sound of distant hooves could signal death or defeat. What once had been equal rivalry slowly bent into imbalance. Comanche tactics weren't born from cruelty. They were survival perfected. They understood movement as power, unpredictability as armor. And as their dominance expanded, the Apache were forced backward, retreating toward the mountains they once ruled. It wasn't surrender. It was endurance against something that refused to fight by old rules. A force too swift, too coordinated, too precise to corner. The plains had found their tacticians, and the era of Comanche mastery had begun. To understand how the Apache began to lose ground, consider the Comanche as organized motion rather than a fixed line. They fought without rigid ranks or shouted commands. Every rider read the ground, adjusted pace, and aligned with the herd's pulse. Communication stayed minimal. Hand signs, brief calls, dust marks, and sudden shifts in direction. They could scatter across open grass to split pursuit, then reconverge on a point for a short strike. The Apache called this confusion. The Comanche called it control. They valued momentum over static positions and time over distance. A seasoned Comanche could loose arrows while hanging from the horse's side, using the animal's body as moving cover. Revolvers were rare at first. Bows delivered faster fire while galloping. Spears and lances followed in close range to break cohesion. Approach seldom came from the front. Flanking attacks and sudden reversals forced the Apache to turn repeatedly, losing formation and sight lines. When pressure built, Comanche riders disengaged on commandless cue, regrouped beyond range, and repeated the cycle. The method punished hesitation, drained horses not trained for sprints, and stretch scouts beyond signaling. What looked fluid to observers was tested discipline backed by riding, practice, and clear objectives. As the new rhythm of war spread, reports moved between camps. Apache scouts described riders who vanished into grass, struck from the sun's direction, and outran pursuit after brief clashes. Families shifted camp locations, horse guards doubled at night, and warnings travelled along trade paths. None of it stopped the pattern. Each raid forced leaders to protect herds, move stores, and commit scarce warriors to constant screening. The Comanche chose when to appear and when to fade, turning distance into a shield. Even victories felt temporary when the enemy reassembled by morning with fresh horses and new angles. Bravery did not decline, predictability did. Apache fighters began to conserve arrows, rotate mounts often, and avoid open ground at midday. Still, flanking maneuvers cut messages, and stolen horses multiplied the next raid's reach. Camp designs responded with wider perimeters, decoys, and deeper lookouts, but the strain grew. Night rides carried families toward rough country, while patrols searched for gaps that kept appearing. The conclusion formed slowly through experience, not a single defeat. The Comanche had built a method that outpaced reaction. For the Apache, the contest shifted from confronting an enemy to managing a threat that controlled time, terrain, and choice. Long before other tribes mastered riding, the Comanche had turned horsemanship into their identity. They bred horses not only for strength but for speed and stamina, shaping animals that could run across the plains for days. Children learned to ride before they could walk, balancing bare back with the instinct of wind. Their horses became extensions of the rider's body, trained to shift, kneel, and respond to the faintest sound. Warfare changed entirely when motion became weapon. The Apache still fought from ground formations using cover and ambush. The Comanche abandoned both. They fought in full movement, circling enemies, firing arrows while riding sideways and striking from multiple angles. Every attack felt like a storm moving across grass. They didn't hold territory by staying. They held it by never stopping. The horse allowed them to appear at dawn and disappear before sunset. Their tactics weren't about bravery or numbers, but precision guided by speed. To fight the Comanche meant facing an enemy that never paused long enough to be caught. And in that endless rhythm of hooves and dust, a new kind of warfare was born on the plains. The Apache had known horses long before, but they never used them the way the Comanche did. To the Apache, horses were tools of travel, not weapons. They favored stealth, endurance, and ambush. But against riders who could strike from any direction, those skills began to fail. The Comanche perfected mounted archery to an art, firing arrows with deadly accuracy at full gallop, using the horse's body as both shield and motion. When arrows ran low, they switched seamlessly to lances, long ash poles tipped with iron, thrust with devastating precision. They rode in loose groups, not formations, yet their movement stayed coordinated through instinct and observation. The Apache could never predict the angle of the next attack. Each raid became a lesson in unpredictability. Even seasoned warriors found themselves surrounded before realizing a trap was forming. The Comanche's advantage wasn't just the horse, it was their unity with it. The animal and the rider moved as one being, faster than thought, deadlier than hesitation. Against that kind of rhythm, no static defense could last. The plains had found their true masters, and the horse was the reason they ruled it. Training a Comanche horse was a process of patience and partnership. Foals were handled from birth, exposed to sound, movement, and human scent until fear vanished completely. Warriors taught horses to obey leg pressure instead of reins, freeing both hands for combat. They learned to drop low under arrows, to stop instantly at a whistle, and to shift direction without command. Some mounts carried painted marks of honor for each successful raid, their hides symbols of trust and history. A Comanche rider could control his horse with balance alone, moving seamlessly across uneven ground. This relationship changed not only their mobility but their identity. To lose a horse was like losing kin. Before battle, riders spoke softly to them, shared water, and decorated their manes with feathers or strips of red cloth. Each movement reflected harmony built over years. The Apache, though skilled hunters, rarely reached such unity. Their horses obeyed command. Comanche horses anticipated it. That difference became decisive when battle began. A well-trained mount could turn survival into dominance, speed into precision. On the plains, victory belonged not just to the warrior who fought best, but to the pair who moved as one. Comanche tactics grew from this unity into complex battlefield choreography. Scouts would ride ahead at dawn, reading the land, wind, and animal trails to judge movement. Small war parties followed in silence, spreading across miles of grass, each rider aware of his neighbour's path without need for signal. When contact came, they attacked from several angles at once, confusing enemies who expected a frontal assault. The first wave drew attention, the second struck the flank, and the third cut retreat routes. They never lingered long enough to be trapped. The Apache, strong in close fighting, often found themselves turning to meet attacks that no longer existed. The Comanche's strength lay in momentum, fighting and retreating as the same motion. Arrows were loosed at full gallop, lances thrust in passing strikes, all while horses moved in coordinated flow. From a distance, battles looked like storms shifting across the plains, organized yet unpredictable. This rhythm of movement became legend, retold even among enemies. What appeared as chaos to outsiders was in truth a calculated balance of timing, precision, and trust between horse and rider. The Comanche didn't just fight on horseback, they thought from horseback. The Apache adapted as best they could, strengthening defenses, tightening ambush sites, and shifting toward mountain terrain where speed lost advantage. But the open plains no longer belonged to them. Comanche riders controlled trade routes, hunting grounds, and river crossings, striking swiftly to punish intrusion. They captured herds, weapons, and supplies, weakening Apache mobility further. The difference between the two nations became clear. The Apache used the horse, the Comanche became it. Their entire social structure revolved around riding, migration, hunting, warfare, even courtship defined by motion. Villages moved with the herds, camps formed around horses rather than shelters. In raids, they covered distances that others considered impossible, appearing hundreds of miles from where they had last been seen. Each campaign refined their discipline, each victory reinforced belief that the plains favoured them. To the Apache, fighting them began to feel like chasing the wind, visible, powerful, but untouchable. And though the Apache never surrendered their spirit, they began to understand that courage could not overcome precision. The age of foot warfare was ending, and in its place rose a new order shaped by the thunder of hooves. By the time raids became routine, the Comanche had learned to use the plains as an ally. Open ground denied cover, expanded sightlines, and favoured horses trained for sudden bursts. They scouted water, buffalo paths, and low ridges, choosing fields that punished hesitation. When Apache war parties moved near rivers or grass corridors, decoys appeared ahead, tempting a chase onto flat terrain. There, riders could circle, feint retreat, and return at speed. The goal was not annihilation. It was control of distance, supplies, and initiative. Scouts marked crossing points with stones and brush, guiding war parties along routes that kept the wind at their backs. If the Apache withdrew, Comanche riders cut herds and seized mounts, weakening future mobility. If the Apache pressed, hidden wings closed the gap, striking from angles the sun concealed. Every choice placed the Apache where movement slowed and response fragmented. On such ground, time belonged to the side that could leave first and return sooner. The Comanche enforced that rhythm, avoiding canyons and timber, living in the open where speed and sight rule. The plains were not empty, they were measured, mapped, and used with patience, until pursuit became disadvantage. Signals kept cohesion across distances. Their communication network matched their mobility. Young riders served as messengers, moving between scattered camps with memorized routes and fallback points. Smoke columns, mirror flashes, and arranged horse tracks carried signals over miles without revealing numbers. At night, brief torch covers and spaced whistles aligned movements without noise spreading far. Supply planning supported raids more than stockpiles did. Families managed remount herds, rotating fresh horses to meeting spots marked by distinctive trees or stream bends. Dry meat, water skins, sinew, and spare bowstrings were cached ahead of time, reducing weight and shortening delays. Scouts observed weather and grass height, selecting lines of travel that preserved hoof strength. When storms built from the west, they rode with wind at their backs, dust masking approach and retreat. If threats gathered, they dissolved into ribbons of riders, regrouping beyond pursuit at agreed landmarks. Apache parties, skilled at tracking, found trails broken and scattered by deliberate misdirection. Campfires were kept small, ash buried, and refuse carried or burned to deny clues. In this pattern, the Comanche could strike repeatedly without exhausting men or horses. Their strength was not simply speed. It was organized movement that multiplied options and reduced risk greatly for every engagement. The Comanche also mastered how to vanish. After every raid, they scattered into small groups, each following different creeks, valleys, or sand ridges. Tracks overlapped until pursuit lost sense of direction. Riders often dragged brush behind horses to erase hoofprints, turning trails into random swirls of grass. Scouts circled back to check whether enemies followed, then sent signals through smoke columns barely visible against midday haze. Even during retreat, discipline stayed intact. Horses rotated constantly to prevent fatigue, riders rested in short intervals under cover of ridges, and waterholes were never used twice in the same sequence. The Apache, tracking by intuition and ground sign, found deception layered into the landscape itself. When pursuit closed distance, the Comanche turned ambush into counterattack, striking at tired scouts and vanishing again. They never defended positions, they reset the map. The plains carried their rhythm so deeply that even their absence created fear. Silence after a raid meant movement elsewhere, forcing Apache patrols to spread thinner each season. That exhaustion favored the mobile side. Through repetition, the Comanche shaped the land into a living defense, one that shifted daily. It was war built on patience, visibility, and disappearance blended into natural motion. Control of the plains meant control of trade and survival. The Comanche understood that rivers carried more than water. They connected routes between tribes and settlers. By holding fords and crossings, they directed movement without permanent settlement. Apache traders seeking to exchange hides or horses had to pass through Comanche-watched corridors, paying tribute in goods or information. Intelligence became another form of power. Captured scouts revealed trail schedules, wagon paths, and camp locations, all mapped by memory and shared through oral routes. Every Comanche leader knew distance markers, trees, stones, or hills aligned with the stars. This knowledge turned ordinary travel into strategy. Raids followed, timing linked to grass renewal and herd migration, ensuring fresh grazing and supply continuity. Even retreat had order, flowing toward water and shade before the next strike. The Apache depended on static reserves, while the Comanche dispersed theirs across terrain. The more the Apache fortified, the more they became predictable. In the Comanche view, permanence meant exposure. By never holding ground longer than necessity required, they remained unreachable. Their dominance rested not in walls or borders, but in the simple fact that they moved where others hesitated to follow. Seasons reinforced their strategy. Summer brought long campaigns, winter demanded endurance. During colder months, smaller raiding bands travelled light, using frozen rivers as pathways, crossing plains unseen. Horses fed on dried grass stored by families who measured harvest cycles around warfare. Children learned to tend remounts, women prepared sinew cords and travel packs, while elders watched the skies for shifting wind. It was a full community synchronized with motion. The Apache often waited for spring to reclaim initiative, but the Comanche never truly stopped. Winter was training season, testing horses, repairing gear, and planning routes for warmer raids. Every movement had meaning, each pause was preparation. Over time, the pattern hardened into habit, and then into law. No written record guided it, yet discipline passed through observation and repetition. This constant readiness separated them from their rivals. Apache war parties could match bravery but not continuity. Comanche adaptability turned the unpredictable plains into something structured, almost methodical. By using every season, every distance, every silence as a weapon, they made the land itself participate in war. The plains did not belong to anyone, they simply obeyed those who understood their language best. By the time the Apache began reorganizing their defenses, the balance of the plains had already shifted. Smaller skirmishes no longer ended in equal loss. They ended in lessons the Comanche had already mastered. Apache leaders attempted new formations, baited traps near rivers, nighttime ambushes and canyon passes, but their timing lagged behind an enemy who could vanish faster than word could travel. In one remembered encounter, a group of Apache riders pursued what appeared to be a scattered Comanche retreat. The chase stretched across open prairie under a setting sun. Without warning, the ground erupted with dust from both flanks. Hidden riders struck from behind the horizon, closing the circle before the Apache could break formation. Arrows fell like rain before the first counterstrike formed. By dusk, the surviving Apache scattered toward the hills, leaving the plains to the victors once more. That day was not a great battle by size, yet it changed memory. It taught the Apache that even retreat was a trap, that the Comanche fought not by chance but by design. The lesson carried through every village. Open ground now meant danger. The plains had chosen their strategists, and the wind carried proof of it. For the Comanche, such victories were not celebrated through ceremony, but remembered through precision. Each encounter tested discipline. How quietly they approached, how quickly they disengaged, how evenly they distributed horses. Their leaders valued coordination more than numbers, judging success by timing rather than trophies. A Comanche rider who survived without losing control of his mount earned equal respect as one who claimed an enemy weapon. Their focus stayed fixed on endurance. When the Apache tried to adapt by moving faster, the Comanche simply extended range, forcing pursuit into exhaustion. They planned routes along grass corridors and waterholes known only to scouts, ensuring sustenance when others starved. Their horses carried rawhide pouches filled with dried meat and spare arrow shafts, allowing travel for days without return. By keeping mobility constant, they removed weakness entirely. The Apache could not corner what refused stillness. Even victory against one raiding band meant little. The next strike arrived from another horizon. The Comanche had turned war into repetition, each skirmish feeding the next. That pattern drained morale more deeply than defeat itself, convincing even the boldest Apache that resistance meant survival, not triumph. Among the Apache, frustration replaced confidence. Scouts reported dust columns that shifted direction faster than messages could be sent. Camps moved nightly, fires buried in ash, children hushed while riders scanned horizons that no longer promised safety. Each new moon carried rumors of raids rising from empty ground. The Comanche were no longer seen first, they were felt. Horses pricked ears before sound arrived. Tracks appeared near waterholes after watchers swore no one had passed. The Apache fought silence and distance as much as men. Even strong positions failed when the enemy avoided battle, slicing supply trails instead. Hunger weakened resolve more than wounds. Messengers sent for aid found paths blocked by unseen riders. Every failure tightened fear, and fear rewrote plans. Leaders shifted camps into rough country, trading reach for protection. Yet retreating into high ground surrendered the plains, the buffalo routes, and the freedom that had shaped them. The Comanche never needed to seize every camp. They only had to make movement costly. Season by season, they succeeded, turning fatigue into advantage and uncertainty into pressure. Through repetition, the Apache learned that survival required caution, while the Comanche demanded momentum. That imbalance deepened until patience itself became a weapon. One remembered season brought a confrontation that fixed the turning tide. An Apache ambush gathered near a dry riverbed, warriors hidden among brush, waiting through heat for a Comanche column expected at dusk. Scouts misread trails. The Comanche arrived from the opposite ridge and split into 3 waves. Dust blinded both sides, yet trained horses moved by pressure and breath. The first charge hit the center, then wheeled away before lances reached. The second wave carved escape paths closed, striking from the west. Riders loosed short arrows at full gallop, then passed with lances extended, breaking cohesion without stopping. Apache shields caught some shafts, but angles shifted faster than counters formed. Within minutes, formations collapsed into fragments. Messengers tried to ride north and found circling horsemen steering them back into confusion. The fight ended quickly, leaving scattered mounts, dropped water gourds, and abandoned spears along the wash. Survivors carried only the memory of timing so precise that resistance felt useless. It was not the largest loss, yet it settled doubt. From that day, reports of Comanche strikes travelled faster than proof, and villages prepared before scouts confirmed movement. Certainty, not numbers, closed the plains. Confidence thinned, caution hardened into habit. After that battle, the rhythm of war changed. Apache leaders called councils, arguing between negotiated distance or continued resistance. Some proposed holding mountain passes. Others urged retreat south where Comanche horses tired in thinner air. Yet the plains could not be reclaimed through endurance alone. Attempts to rebuild hunting routes or reopen trade paths met swift retaliation. Comanche riders struck crossings, scattered herds, and captured remounts, eroding mobility with each raid. Traders passing between camps spoke of riders appearing at twilight, unseen until dust lifted around them. Reputation multiplied effect. Even guarded camps felt temporary. The Apache shifted to smaller territories, concentrating on survival instead of dominance. Scouts watched horizons while families packed light, ready to move at any warning. Beneath these adjustments lay a quiet admission. Open ground favoured the riders who never stopped. The Comanche had refined war to motion, denying every pause needed for recovery. Victories against single bands changed little when another appeared from a different horizon. Over time, adaptation preserved people but surrendered space. Those wide horizons, once symbols of freedom, now reminded warriors of a power that thrived on unity and speed. The lesson endured across generations. Its echo travelled with every hoofbeat forever. When the fighting finally began to slow, the plains did not grow peaceful. They grew watchful. The Comanche no longer needed to prove dominance. Their control existed in movement alone. Trails once shared by tribes now carried only their riders. The Apache, forced into mountain regions, watched from distance as herds shifted under new guardianship. Trade paths, river crossings, and hunting routes all bent toward the rhythm of the horse nation. Yet even the Comanche understood that mastery of the plains required constant vigilance. Their strength depended on freedom, not territory. Every camp moved with the seasons, following grass and water. Scouts still rode far, marking storms, enemies, and travelers alike. The Apache remained, proud but diminished, measuring survival through quiet withdrawal rather than open battle. Between them stretched the silence of hard-earned respect. Both peoples had learned that the land chose no favourites. It only served those who adapted fastest. The Comanche adapted best. For a generation, their tactics defined how war, hunting, and survival merged into one living discipline. Across the southern plains, their hoofbeats replaced boundaries with memory, leaving behind not ruin but order built on motion. Comanche dominance reshaped every frontier they touched. Traders learned to negotiate safe passage with gifts rather than confrontation. Spanish patrols advanced cautiously, aware that open terrain favoured riders who appeared and vanished like dust. Even rival tribes adjusted, adopting elements of Comanche movement to endure. The horse became currency, weapon, and language of power. Children grew up measuring distance in days of riding rather than in miles. Discipline passed through generations, not through instruction but through imitation. The Apache, meanwhile, rebuilt around defence, crafting smaller, tighter communities near protected valleys. Their knowledge of terrain preserved them, but their reach ended where the plains began. The balance of freedom tilted toward the Comanche way of life. Mobility replaced walls, instinct replaced command. What began as a means of hunting had become the philosophy of a nation. Every movement carried intention, and every retreat carried meaning. Their mastery of terrain and time was unmatched, and even as new threats appeared from beyond the frontier, the lesson remained unbroken. Whoever controlled motion controlled survival. The plains echoed that truth long after the battles had ended. When foreign settlers began moving west, they found a land already shaped by Comanche law. Travellers described endless horizons patrolled by riders who appeared without warning, assessing friend or foe in moments. No wagon train crossed safely without understanding the unspoken order that ruled those plains. The Comanche demanded respect through balance, not cruelty. They raided to maintain advantage, not destruction. Settlers mistook their discipline for savagery, never realizing they were witnessing a civilization sustained by precision and code. Apache scouts watched these encounters from afar, understanding that new forces would soon test the same tactics once used against them. Yet even as firearms and forts spread, the Comanche's rhythm endured longer than most expected. Their control of space, timing, and distance delayed colonization for decades. Each engagement repeated their founding rule: never fight on another's terms. They withdrew when needed, struck when ready, and trusted the horse more than promises. The Apache learned from their persistence, preserving similar strategies within mountain passes. But across open grasslands, the identity of mastery remained unchanged. The wind carried the same familiar sound, the hooves of riders who knew no boundary but the horizon. By the mid-19th century, the plains began to change. Trade routes widened, military patrols multiplied, and iron rails cut paths where buffalo once roamed. The Comanche still rode, but the land no longer moved as it once had. Herds thinned, rivers dried, and fences carved invisible prisons through what had been open life. The Apache watched these shifts from the mountains, recalling how quickly dominance could vanish. For both nations, survival now depended on adaptation to forces beyond tribal control. Comanche tactics remained effective, but their targets changed. Defense of families, herds, and independence replaced expansion. Yet their knowledge of terrain continued to confound soldiers unaccustomed to the plains. Even against repeating rifles, their mobility bought time and memory. They could not stop the tide, but they slowed it, ensuring that their methods remained legend. The old rivalries faded into stories told beside campfires, lessons passed to children who would never see the plains untouched again. Still, the discipline that once broke the Apache endured as legacy, written not in conquest, but in motion. The land itself remembered who had ruled by speed and silence. Today, the memory of those riders survives not only in stories but in the landscape itself. Place names, broken trails, and preserved campsites mark where precision once ruled the horizon. Historians describe their victories in numbers, but the deeper legacy lies in how they understood balance between man, horse, and land. The Comanche taught the world that mastery of terrain requires respect for it. They fought to live, not to destroy. The Apache, though once their greatest rivals, carried fragments of that same lesson into their own survival. In every wind crossing the southern plains, echoes remain of two nations that defined endurance through different paths. The Comanche won their dominance not through weapons, but through motion refined into strategy. Their story endures because it speaks to adaptation itself, the art of reading the world and responding faster than it changes. When silence falls over the plains today, it carries memory more lasting than monuments. It is the sound of a people who moved with the land, not against it, and in that quiet distance the plains still whisper their name. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your time here. If you'd like to hear more quiet history like this, consider subscribing. Your support truly means a lot.